Hello, welcome to our webinar on how to minimize risk in global employment. I'm Meredith Weber, the Operations Director for the Global Employment and Mobility team at Airswift. I'm very excited to introduce our moderator today, Scott Finkelstein. Scott has an extensive business background as a C-level executive for global companies. He's also a P&L leader and is a highly sought after advisor and mentor for startups. I'm going to let Scott introduce our panelists today.
Thanks, Meredith. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for all our amazing listeners. We're going to dive into a lot of stuff as fast as we can, as deep as we can in the 25 or so minutes we have. So don't forget, put your questions into the chat. We'll get to those at the end. We absolutely are leaving time for that. But in the meantime, let's kick it over to Steve and Colby, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Steve, why don't you start?
Scott, thank you. I'm Steve Jenkins. I'm the Global Sales Director at Airswift for the Global Employment and Mobility team. Got a background of about 20 years or so. Don't want to date myself too much, but in the employee outsourcing and human resource outsourcing space. So really excited about this today. We're going to talk specifically about global employment. It's a very exciting area. And we're seeing a lot of growth and expansion. So really excited to talk about it, and hopefully we can answer some questions and give some insight.
Awesome. Colby.
Thanks, Scott. And for those of you that don't know, Steve actually did shave this morning, so appreciate him coming cleanly shaved today. But my name's Colby Clark. I'm the Vice President for the Global Employer Division here at Airswift. Been in this industry for about 10, 15 years or so. Been in the employer of record industry for about 2 years. I've learned a lot from doing this, and really excited to kind of share a lot about this. But a lot of the complications, finding out that there's no companies that are the same, the complexities of global employment, and we've seen a lot of this stuff and seen a lot of different instances. So excited to share some of that, and so see if we can help anybody out here.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. We got a lot to cover. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about Airswift, and let's briefly define employer of record.
Yeah, absolutely. So Airswift has been in business for about 40 years and primarily started off really as a recruiting firm for the energy industries, oil and gas. So was very heavy centric into that and moving more towards a very agnostic, where we're embracing a lot of different industries, and especially on the in the global employment and the employer of record side, seeing a lot of different industries coming into here, but able to really help companies out with any of their employment needs, from recruiting, hiring practices, human resource practices, to expanding their footprints into different countries, whether it be through a contractual basis or even the employer of record basis. So we can absolutely help a lot of companies out with any of those.
Steve, you want to get into the benefits a little bit? And kind of go,
kind of going back to the definition, I think, employer of record or commonly called EOR, it's where an organization that uses its entity in a specific country to serve as the employer for tax purposes, compliance purposes, while that employee that's hired by the EOR performs work for a different company, in this case, the client. The employer of record takes on all the responsibility of the traditional employment tasks and liabilities. This allows companies, there's several reasons why someone would look at this model. One is speed to market. Penetrating a new market faster than if you were to set it up on your own. Obviously, global expansion. Companies that are looking, to expand globally, maybe new operations in new countries, offshoring specific roles to new countries. Just any situation where a company may not have a local presence in a country that they're looking to employ. That's where the EOR solution comes in.
Gotcha. You shared some amazing numbers as we were preparing about speed to market and the difference between going with an EOR like Airswift versus me doing it on my own. Share those numbers with the audience, because they're wow.
Well, it kind of depends, I guess, but it's, depending on the country. But if you're looking to set up an entity and all of the resources required to be an employer in a given country, on the low end, it's probably about 12 months. In some cases, 18 plus. So, with the EOR model, depending, in a situation where you're hiring local nationals, then, it's 6 to 8 weeks the most. Obviously, if there is a need for immigration, visa sponsorship, that time's lengthened, as it would be with anyone, because that's going to be determined by the country. But overall, yes, that's one of the big reasons when companies look to expand, or if they bid and win a new project, that they have to have employees in a new country. This allows them to do so at a much faster and lower initial cost than what it would be if they were setting up on their own.
Wow. So as I say, time is money, right?
Absolutely.
Time is money, right? So if I'm a company here, say in the U.S., and I want to hire employees in Japan, you guys can help me do that.
I'll take that one.
So have at it.
Actually, still going right back to what we were saying. I mean, you really have two different options of doing this. Do it yourself, and when we're talking about speed and efficiency, you have to take that into account, but you also have to take the monetary perspectives into account too. Setting up a permanent establishment, it's going to cost money. The faster you want to move, the more money it's probably going to cost. Think about who you have to hire to support that as well. You need to be thinking about your legal aspects, so probably going to have some lawyers that are specific to that country, human resource needs, payroll needs, compliance needs. These are all areas that you really need to think about if you are going to move into a country like that. But to what you said is moving into a country like Japan, that's exactly what we do. The employer of record model is allowing you to utilize our entity as a footprint to get you access into that country. Now, keep in mind, you are able to determine hiring, who you hire, who you fire, salaries, wages. It's your culture. So we want to embrace that and work with you on those areas. But again, it gives you the opportunity to utilize our expertise in certain countries, and really all countries if you need to, but in certain countries to quickly gain access to that in those instances.
Correct. You go a little deeper. You said, I get to decide who I hire, who I fire. A question that always comes up in this model is, who do they work for?
Daily, multiple times a day. So I think the key is we're hiring these employees. They are working for our, in this case, Airswift's entity in that country. We're hiring those employees on your behalf. So you determine who's hired. You determine salaries. You determine work schedules. Any of those things. We will mirror your policies and procedures. To the point of culture. We want to make sure that these employees, these international employees that you have, as much as possible, have the same experience as your local employees that you have. So we want to be ingrained in your culture. We want to mirror that culture as best we can. To make sure that they have a positive experience. We work for you. And again, we're hiring these people on your behalf. And so you dictate their work schedule and you dictate to us how they will be treated. So again, culture is very important. And it's also important that they have a positive experience because the cost of turnover in replacing these employees is exponentially higher than it would be for one of your traditional employers in country.
And one last thing on this, then we'll move on to, we're going to get into risk mitigation, a whole bunch of stuff there, scary stuff. As the employee, who do I think, maybe is the best way to say it, that I work for?
Well, all the day-to-day activity, your company directs that. So you have direction over the employees. The way I like to put it is think of, a current employee, if they have an issue or a concern, if they have a question about payroll, about a holiday, vacation, typically they're going to reach out to an HR representative. They're going to be assigned someone within your organization. That's exactly what we do. We have a service consultant assigned to those employees in country. So if they have a question regarding their, paycheck, any of those type, kind of more traditional HR type questions, they will reach out to us. But again, you give them the direction. You're in charge of their performance, their reviews, etc. So if there's a question, we'll happily answer it. And again, we will always defer to you on all of those situations, but we do have direct contact with the employees.
Well, and to go a little bit even deeper on that one, especially when you're talking about Airswift and specifically the offering that we have, we are a much more high touch, white glove service. So when you are looking at the different employer of record companies out there that do this, it is something you need to keep in mind. Are they able to provide the level of service that you are expecting? There's a lot of tech industry heavy ones out there, and there's certainly competitors of ours that are white glove. But evaluating and understanding what you're looking for your individual specific needs for your company is something that I always like to suggest. Make sure you dig in real deep there on those areas.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's go to the topic we all love: risk mitigation. Now, there's a lot there. We're going to try to get into a lot of it, but why don't you kick the audience off so we can talk about legal, financial, reputation risks, and a lot more. Pick your poison. Where do you want to start?
That's probably have a whole episode on this one.
How much time do we have?
Yeah.
We have about 15 minutes.
Okay.
We need another hour and a half.
Yeah.
So I'd say when I first started working here, being very U.S. heavy, understanding the United States pretty well, working in this industry, states are always going to be different and have a pretty good concept of that. You look at states like California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, Hawaii, that are very employee-centered states. In a lot of cases, I've found pale in comparison to the laws and regulations, the compliance that you need to have a very deep understanding of when you're moving into some of these markets, and especially in some cases the European markets. There are instances where terminating somebody inside of the United States, the way that you want to do it, navigating that might be legal in the United States, but in other countries it could be heavily frowned upon, and if you don't navigate those almost to the letter of the law, in some cases, even if you do, in some cases we've seen that even then you can have employees sitting on your payroll and still becoming a burden to your salaries and tax burdens and all of this, that you have to make sure that it's handled correctly. So again, coming to the expertise, making sure that you're following in that country's specific laws and that country's statutory compliance areas, that's got to be done the right way. Otherwise, you can really be setting yourself up for some heavy regulatory, financial, monetary, legal ramifications if you don't.
And I think one of the things, talking about it is having that local expertise helps. Having the people and the beauty with Airswift and our footprint, in these countries is having the local boots on the ground that truly have an in-depth understanding. These laws change on a daily basis, just like they do everywhere. And without having that local presence, you really do run a risk. And it's our clients that run into this, it's not due to any malicious intent. It's just a lack of knowledge. And without having those resources available to you, you can't be expected to keep up with it. So to the point of having this large footprint, this large presence, we really allow these companies to employ with that peace of mind of not running into some of these problems that we've seen where someone was terminated inappropriately or even appropriately, but without understanding the termination clause in an employment contract, the risk that company takes is just it's not necessary, and it's just a way. It's an unbudgeted item that typically jumps up and that you're not prepared for.
So that leads us into the next topic we've been talking about from the employer perspective. Now we know here in the U.S., and I'm sure a lot of people listening, it's typically at will. So a U.S. company in the U.S. and just about every state can fire you tomorrow if they want to. It's not such the same in some countries, and I know we got a couple stories we can share there.
I'll let you take this one.
Gee, thanks. Yeah, that's probably an understatement, and it goes back to what you said. What you don't know can really hurt you in a lot of these circumstances. We did have an instance of a company that we were working with, one of the first ones that when I came on board, where they're operating out in the Netherlands, a European country. And one of the issues that we found is that terminating an employee, again, has to be done very distinctly, very correctly. And in some circumstances, it doesn't really matter what that employee has done. You still have to follow those laws. And, this is an exaggerated example, but if somebody stole money out of the cash register, you're going to want to terminate that employee. And in some countries, I've found that you are mandated by law as an employer to actually go out and find that employee their next job in the same industry. And it's very tightly scrutinized, very tightly regimented or regulated. And it was something that I just found absolutely shocking. And again, it goes back to the risk entailed with this, that, if you don't do this correctly, and in some cases, even if you do, the financial and monetary burdens can be pretty heavy in these instances.
You shared in some of the stories we talked about, like you might have to keep paying them for months, if not a year.
Absolutely. We have absolutely seen some of these instances. We've seen some stuff in Spain, Portugal, and again, protecting the employees, which is what you want to do. You absolutely want to protect these employees, but again, it's sitting on the payroll for an additional 8 to 9 months trying to mitigate this and then trying to get them off the books. Coming to the expert in those areas, which Airswift absolutely has, and inside of those countries, we'll regulate that for you, navigate those difficult areas, and make sure that it's done in the compliant way to make sure that the risk is as minimal as possible.
Yeah, well, and I know we talked about one of the ways you guys help your clients is just because you have a 1-year contract in Portugal, you can't just at the end of that year get rid of your employees. You still might be paying them even though you're no longer doing business. And from a profit and loss standpoint, these are things you guide clients on understanding, how that affects the P&L.
That's right.
And how to structure that from the beginning of that employee's experience.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
So Steve, I want to switch over to you. You and I have talked a little bit about contractor status.
Yes.
Are they an employee or a contractor, and where companies can really get all twisted there and the financial ramifications for that?
This actually comes up quite often. As a matter of fact, a very recent conversation with a renewable energy company, and I really appreciated this because the way that they put it in a very simple way that I hadn't really thought about. But they were asking the question because they said, we've got employees working on the same project. One employee is considered a full-time employee. The other employee is a contractor. They both report to the same person. They are both managed the same expectations, same measurements of their success. Everything's identical, but one is considered a full-time employee, so they're paying the full tax burden on that employee, doing all the withholding taxes, everything that they're supposed to do. The other is considered a contractor. And the question that the person came back with was how? How can we do that? And they're answering their own question, hence the engagement. When they came in and said, we don't feel like we're compliantly doing this because of that situation. And so looking at that, the rules change. So what might have been considered completely compliant, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, may not now. These laws are fluid.
Last month.
Each country, exactly. Each country, changes these regularly. In the U.S., we're used to the IRS guidelines, which are consistent, but that's just the U.S. That's not everywhere else, and so it's very different. So this status really needs to be frequently reviewed. I think a safe way to look at it, if it's a long-term contractor, short-term is totally different. Long-term contractor, if they're at arm's length and they're receiving no additional benefits from you as the employer or our client, then sure, you're probably good. But other than that, I think there's some good questions that we talk about them asking. And one is, does that worker have complete control over where and when they work? In other words, are they hired for a specific task and they're going to be paid based on the completion of that task, whatever the terms are set up in the contract? Okay. But are you paying solely for their services, or do you also provide benefits, even as much, holiday pay or sick pay? Does the worker have other clients in the same field? In other words, are they doing this work for other companies, or else are they solely working for you? Do they market themselves independently? Do they have their own website? Anything else that separates them from your organization? And then the big one, which again goes back to the conversation that we'd had recently, was do you supply them with equipment to do the job? And that was the big telling sign for that particular client that was asking that question and saying that. It's like, we provide them all of the supplies, all of the equipment that they need to do the job, just like we do our internal employees. And I think, that was the trigger of realizing that they probably needed to change the status. And so, the good news of this is as a Airswift's employer of record solution can fix this, and if you have people that may be currently as a contractor internationally that you feel you may want to review this, we'll be happy to have the conversation and kind of go down that road with you to see. And if they should be considered a regular full-time employee, the EOR solution can help.
Awesome. Well, let's keep moving forward because this time goes fast, and I know we still have one big topic we want to cover. But before we get there, the last thing I want to talk about here is let's talk about taxation and the tax burden. And sometimes it's beneficial. Hey, this is the country it's more profitable being versus the opposite. Colby, you want to kind of kick us off there?
Well, yeah, I think that when you're looking at, and I think you actually maybe even had an example of somebody moving into Latin America.
Well, yeah, the specifically the statutory burdens, because so, again, a lot of people have looked at EOR in the case where they're offshoring specific roles, right? And this has been going on for decades. And where they look and say, hey, there's a very deep talent pool in this specific country. We would like to offshore certain roles to a group there. And so they've utilized, they look at using an EOR for that if they're not setting it up themselves. And so, but what we find is, and one of the things, sometimes we're the bearer of bad news when they come and look at that and we run through it and say, yes, moving into that country has a much lower wage base. So someone that might cost you $100,000 US may cost you $40,000. So the initial savings looks great. But what they may not understand are those statutory burdens associated with that salary can be 100+%. So that person that you thought was going to cost you $40,000 is actually going to cost you $90,000. So, these are things that vary so greatly. And in those circumstances, a lot of times we'll just kind of give them examples. If you're looking to offshore a specific role, let's look at what it will be in country A, B, and C and compare. Now, obviously, the number one thing is finding the right talent. And if the talent's available and it can be done in a way that's going to be less costly, then obviously that's something to consider.
Well, and you got to, especially just understanding who you are looking for as an employer. You have countries in some circumstances like the Middle East don't even have a tax burden, in some instances like that. So coming again to a company that understands what your needs, what your desires are, starting from the recruiting process, being very open about what you can and cannot do. But again, Airswift is able to recruit those individuals, hire those individuals, and put them in the market on a compliance standpoint. So again, having a full grip on your employees is absolutely.
All right, we don't have a lot of time left, and just to remind everyone, hey, remember, put your questions in the chat. We are saving time to make sure Meredith can throw that out to the group here, and we can answer those questions as well. Now, this last topic we want to just scratch the surface on. I think this will be our next webinar we do. We're going to dive into it is employees in the U.S. and the laugh is I'll just let you go from there.
I'll start. Yeah. So I'll go back to actually when I first started at Airswift, I actually thought, man, the difficult part of this is going to be companies that are looking to expand out of the United States into other parts of the globe. And I've found actually after talking with a lot of these global corporations, it's the polar opposite. Companies are terrified to step foot inside the United States. And looking back on this for guys like Scott, Steve and myself have a very heavy background in the employee benefits of the United States. It doesn't seem that big of a deal, but man, when you pull it back and look at the Affordable Care Act, the tax burdens, I think you even had a quote that it's not one country, it's 50
Federation of 50 states.
Federation of 50 different states.
So, and they're all different.
It's absolutely true. You have different state unemployment accounts, federal accounts, but again, the big one that we're seeing is navigating the Affordable Care Act, health benefits, dental, vision, 401ks, maintaining compliance there, long-term disability, short-term disability. A lot of countries get that on their own, and they don't realize that inside the United States. That's a privatized sector that you have to be able to navigate. So,
and I've had these conversations, and the gentleman that shared that with me when he talked about first looking to come into the U.S., he said everybody wants to get into this market. And when they first looked at it, he said, it's most people view the U.S. as one giant country, very large market. And he said, when in actuality, it's a federation of 50 states and they're all different. And I just kind of chuckled. And I said, being from Texas, I can attest it's very different. So, but one of the things he talked about was they just kind of, they put the brakes on because frankly, they were just so intimidated because knowing the level of employee that they were looking at. This was not a junior person. This was going to be a highly compensated employee, leadership type role, building out an organization, to be able to be competitive, to provide benefits, 401k, which they've never, no one's familiar with that. What are the rules and regulations, but the big piece being the health benefits, it's just overwhelming. And then when we start looking into coming to the U.S. of where, because even here, we all know the difference, from state to state, and breaking that down and looking at, a proposed salary and the difference of that salary for an employee that's based in a state without a state income tax versus one that's more heavily taxed. So there's a lot of these things to take into consideration. But again, the big piece of this and kind of what we're presenting to that is the peace of mind of knowing we take all of that off your plate. The benefits are done, 401k done, everything's done. And then the big thing is just protecting you from all of the contingent liabilities that hang out there, regardless of what state you want to operate in. So again, to Colby's point, and we chuckle about this often because we thought that to us what seemed normal, you start to realize how abnormal it is and how foreign it is. Great term of dealing with the complexities of being an employer in the U.S. It's one of the toughest places in the world.
Well, I think that's going to be our next webinar. So, gentlemen, we are out of time. We could keep going forever. I want to pass it over, Meredith, to you. I know we've got some questions that were in the chat, and let's try to answer them.
Be Steve and I insulting each other. For 5 minutes, so. And by the way, set the record straight. You are not from Texas. You're from Oklahoma.
But
we're going to talk about states. Just live
Where
in
are you?
Oklahoma. I was born in Texas.
No fun.
Like I said, we can do this right.
Yeah.
No fun.
We can spend all day.
Meredith, what's our first question? Let's stop these.
It's my turn. I do have one question here. In your experience, are there industries or businesses that benefit more from EOR services?
No, I'd say we're very agnostic, and you could probably jump in here a little bit more. But I'd say from our standpoint, kind of what I was hitting on in the very beginning, historically, we looked at oil and gas, started our footprint here, but we found that as an EOR provider, you have to be very agnostic towards different companies and what their looks and desires are. So we've seen technology companies, oil and gas companies, absolutely. They do tend to need to have that fast get into the country quickly. So we do see a lot of that. But again, from our side, engineering, architectural, HVAC, plumbing, you'd be surprised the companies that we deal with.
Yeah, we'll help them all.
Yep.
Great. And then there was another one, and you guys touched on this earlier in the conversation, but I want to talk about, is it possible to transition employees from an EOR service provider directly back to employment with my company?
Absolutely. And frankly, in a lot of cases, that's the goal. As we talk about the speed to market, once a company, establishes, as an example, those initial employees, and talking about coming to the US, and that team's built up, at some point it's going to make sense for them to have all the support personnel around them, to have the entity set up to do everything in-house, and at that point, absolutely, we navigate that with them. It's frankly a pretty simple process. But again, for most people, early on in the conversation, when we meet with people, it really is a mutual evaluation. They're evaluating us. We are a very high touch model. We're not just a tech platform, but we're also looking at companies that want to be a best in class employer. That want to make sure that employee experience, is what they deserve. That they're treating these global employees the same way they treat their home country employees. And so, it really is a mutual evaluation. And part of that is talking to them about why they're looking to do this. And if they're looking to grow, if they're looking to expand, at some point, absolutely, they're probably going to outgrow us.
So you guys you're very much a partner on their journey.
Absolutely.
Yes, very
Absolutely.
much so. Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are the questions that we had in the chat, and we really look forward to talking with all of our guests here further. If you want to discuss your business goals and needs further, please look at the link. We'll put it here on the bottom of the screen, and get in touch with us. We want to continue the conversation. Thanks for coming.